going to encourage you. And it's such a picture of Jesus' power made perfect in weakness. And so we're going to get to that in just a moment, but it's all a part of our Control Freak series. It continues with part 3 this coming Sunday at 8, 9, 10, and 11 Eastern, as well as 8 p.m. We're having a conversation about control and power. And this week we're talking about power in relationships. So you want to join us for that. But this story is going to be incredible for you to hear, and we're so excited to share it with you. Say hi in the chat if you like, and just praying that you'd be inspired by this.
Today, you are in for a real treat. As the nation and as the world continues to be ravaged by COVID-19, I have a dear friend for whom the global crisis became a personal crisis. This past March, I got word that my friend Stuart Hall had tested positive for COVID-19. And when I checked in with Stuart, he was quarantining at home, and his words were, "This thing is no joke." And he was correct. His situation continued to deteriorate. 2 weeks later, his wife Kellee rushed him to the hospital where he was admitted. And, well, in a minute, I'll let Stuart and Kellee tell you what happened next. I've known Stuart and Kellee for many years. They have 3 grown kids. We've spoken at camps together. We've actually exercised and run together. We co-authored 2 books together. Stuart is a phenomenal communicator. Together, he and Kellee have literally impacted thousands of lives and influenced hundreds of adults and students to step across the line of faith. There are church leaders all over the country who point back to a single conversation with Stuart as the catalyst for why they entered full-time ministry. So, with the uptick in the COVID cases and so much mystery surrounding this dangerous virus, I thought it would be great for you to hear their story from them. So, here we go. Stuart and Kellee, thank you for doing this. And I'm sure you've told your story to so many people privately, so thank you for sharing it with the whole world. And I think the best way to do this is just to start at the beginning and give everybody kind of the timeline, because this journey begins late March into early. And so let's start with this. You started having symptoms, and like everybody else, all through pollen season, we're all like, oh no, is this that? So what were your symptoms, and just take it from there.
Right. Well, one interesting thing is this, when I thought there's one hill that's really steep, and I thought that's the reason why, but I got home that night and just couldn't kick it, and progressively started feeling like I had the flu. The more we heard and read about the virus, the more concerned we became. So 4 days later, on March 29th, we went to the emergency room.
An ER at a hospital.
An ER at a hospital. And even at that time, I think this is lost on the general public that hasn't had a personal experience with this. Even then, Kellee pulled up to the emergency room. I got out of the vehicle, and she had to go and park in the parking lot. She couldn't come in.
And wait.
They didn't have enough tests at the time. I didn't have enough symptoms for them to go ahead and admit me. They took an x-ray of my chest. Their words exactly were, "We're 97% sure you have the virus, but because you don't have enough symptoms and because we don't have enough tests, we're going to send you home to self-quarantine." So I went home, stayed in my bedroom the rest of the time until we had to go back, and I progressively got worse. My fever would spike to 104. Kellee could use Tylenol and get it down to like 101, but it never got back to normal. In between all that, on April the 3rd, our general practitioner contacted an infectious disease doctor who prescribed me hydroxychloroquine, which is now a controversial drug, and there are varying opinions.
Right.
What we know happened to me is that I didn't sleep for 72 hours after I started taking that drug.
And so you started taking it how long after you had symptoms?
I started taking it on April the 3rd.
Okay.
That was
10 days.
about 10 days.
Yeah.
And my heart was racing. I couldn't sleep. I would go from a chair to the bed to a chair to the bed, and it was pretty scary. My fever went away, but my heart was just doing something weird until April the 6th was a really bad day, to the degree that night our son stayed in the bedroom with us. And Kellee, to her credit, I'm just stubborn. We had seen so many stories. We knew that if we go back to the hospital, they're going to intubate me, they're going to put me on a ventilator, and we're going to be separated. And I, being hard-headed and stubborn, was just thinking, okay, let this medicine run its course in my body and I'll be okay.
And at this point, you hadn't tested positive yet, right?
I hadn't even taken a test.
Right.
So early morning, April the 7th, I finally looked at her and said, we need to go to the doctor, we need to go to the hospital. And so she and our son Grant rushed me to the hospital. It was this precarious on the way that she almost stopped at a fire station because I just couldn't breathe.
Wow.
And
can I back up one second? So you didn't sleep for 72 hours?
72 hours.
And so Kellee, you have to be thinking through all this. I mean, you're taking care of your husband, but you're also thinking if he's COVID-19 positive, perhaps so are you, all the kids. So what?
I think we all knew we had experienced the virus. I had a fever probably a day before him, but mine only lasted, it was very minimal, and it only lasted for a couple of days. And then my children, our two older children, probably like towards that first weekend. So like maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they were kind of just down, didn't feel good, had a little low-grade fever, but then we were all fine.
Wow.
And nothing, any type of symptoms, none of us had.
So you didn't even suspect?
Obviously you're suspecting because you're just going, everything you do at that point and you feel in your body, you're wondering, is this the virus?
Yeah, that makes me feel better, right?
I mean, I think everybody in the world is feeling that way.
And I think it was March the 11th, like the National Basketball Association had canceled their season. So that was starting to happen as well.
And we had brought both of our daughters had to come home from college. So, I mean, it was, the progression was just happening. And then it's just like all of a sudden these symptoms and you're going, no, this can't be. How are we getting this virus? Where did it come from? Who have we been around? And it's just crazy to think that we just couldn't imagine. And then the fact that we live in such a small community, we didn't want to tell people because it feels as if you have leprosy.
Yep.
And we didn't want to freak people out because there's so much unknown, still so much unknown, but we didn't want to just create such chaos. So we didn't tell anyone. We told our family, and we told a couple of friends because at that point we couldn't go to the grocery store any longer.
None of you could?
No.
Or you didn't feel like
we were all quarantined in the house. So we did ask a couple of families to help. Could you bring us this? Could you bring us this? But I asked them specifically, please don't tell, because I didn't want our community to know just because of chaos. Right. I didn't want it to create that much drama.
At the beginning, I mentioned that y'all have 3 adult kids, so catch us up, age of your kids, and then we'll jump back into the story. So Grant is
25.
Just returned from a 2.5-year stint with the Peace Corps in Central America. Our oldest daughter will be 23 this month, Chandler, and she graduated virtually from college during the pandemic. And then our youngest, Cameron, is 20 and is already back at school. She's a soccer player, so they're already training again, which was also
part of
a
anxiety.
bit of anxiety sending her back.
So at this point, all 5 of you are at home. Everybody's had mild symptoms. You're wondering, but nobody gets tested. Then Dad gets
serious symptoms.
They prescribe you the drug. You still haven't been tested. You don't sleep for 72 hours. And at some point through all of that, all of us are, getting texts and we're praying and and then, of course, in my mind, it's like, hey, Stuart's young and healthy and he'll get through this. Right. So, hey, dude, how's it? It's kind of casual. But then the messaging ramps up and we know it's serious. So let's go back to that terrible day. You pass the fire station, you think, we're going to make it to the ER.
He was like, no, take me straight to the ER. Don't stop.
And it's good we're stopping there because one thing that's crazy about this story, the last thing I remember is watching the movie Creed on the night of April the 6th. And the next thing I remember is starting to come out of the fog in ICU.
Yeah.
And I've had to be told everything else.
And that's an important thing for our audience to understand, that from the March or April 7th on, what the rest of this story you only know because
By word of
Kellee
mouth.
and the doctors and some close friends have told you, because essentially you are out of it.
I'm out of it,
So you get to the hospital. He hasn't slept in 72 hours. He's very sick. His heart is racing. What happens?
So they allow me this time to go in with him. And so my son now is sitting in the parking lot by himself. As soon as I go in, they start asking me, of course, we go into a secluded area, and they start asking me every question about his symptoms and what's happening. And then the last thing the doctor says is we've got to intubate him. And I'm like, I
The
figured.
same day?
This was when it was early morning on the 7th. So he's like, we've got to intubate him because his oxygen level was just horrifically low. And I said, I figured you would. And he said, you're going to have to leave now. And I'm like, okay. So the last thing Stuart told me is, you might have saved my life. And they walked me out to the waiting room. And I sat there for probably maybe another 45 minutes. At this point, my daughters had gotten to the parking lot and were sitting with our son. So all three of them are sitting in the parking lot, and I'm waiting on somebody just to come tell me the next step. Well, the first person that comes and talks to me is a cardiologist, and Dr. Kakar, and he comes in and says, hey, I want to let you know that either your husband is either having or has had a heart attack, which I'm going, what? I mean, he's a healthy, that never crossed my mind.
Right.
And he said, do we have permission to go in and look? And I'm like, absolutely. So that was another 2.5 probably hours. So he comes back finally and says his main artery was 100% blocked. We have put a stent in. He's also in congestive heart failure. So we've put a pump on his heart. At this time, I asked him, could I get my children on the phone that he could tell all of us instead of just me? And he said, yes. So he told us all the information at the same time. Well, my son said, what are his chances of survival? And he said, well, if it was just the heart attack, I'd say 50%. He said, but the fact that he's COVID positive, they're assuming, they have not tested him at this point, but of course, all signs point there. He's been intubated and he's in congestive heart failure. He said, it's not good. I don't give him much. Basically, I don't give him much hope. But then he said, what I will tell you is I'm a man of faith. And he said, at this point, it's time to pray. And I'm like, okay, we can do that.
Yeah. And you may have already been doing some of that, I'm thinking,
I was
right?
we had been definitely praying, but
to hear a doctor say that,
yes,
so comforting.
and literally, I felt as if he wanted to cry with me, and he wanted to get up and hug me, but we can't do that,
Right.
Because it was just him and I. There was nobody else in the room, and at that point, they allowed me to stay until he got moved to ICU. And when he got moved to ICU, I walked up there. I couldn't see him, but I walked up there. I had to sign release papers. And the lady told me, she escorted me out. And I went to the parking lot, met my children. We all got in a car together and just cried. And our older daughter said, can we pray, Mom? And I'm like, absolutely, we can pray. So we did, and then we separated cars, and we drove home, and on my drive home, I thought, I haven't told anybody, but now's the time. If we need a miracle and we need to pray, then I'm going to ask every friend that I have to please pray for him. So at that point, I did put it on all social media channels that I had to please pray, and the people just were calling me and texting me. I couldn't believe it, because this was like 5-something in the morning. This was not in the middle of the day. So people were waking up to it.
Yep.
When we got home, we got everything unloaded. I walked upstairs and the sun was rising, and I was looking. I was like, oh, look how beautiful the sun's rising. And when I looked out, my neighbor, which is also a very good friend of our family's, she's sitting on the curb across from our house, just with her Bible open and just praying out loud. And I'm like, I'm just like, what are you doing? She said, I don't know what else to do. And I think that's how everybody felt. And that's how we felt. I mean, we didn't know what else. We were still in quarantine. So no family could be around us. No friends could be around us. We still couldn't go to the grocery store. So it was just
you're
such
isolated.
a strange.
He's isolated. And then you're at this place that, some people have been, perhaps many people, where you're waiting for the call.
Phone to phone to phone. Phone call to phone call.
Yeah. So you're on you're on the ventilator sort of the next part of the story for a week. So we're from the 7th through the 13th. You're getting calls.
You do. You live from phone call to phone call.
Yeah.
You have a palliative care doctor. Her name is Dr. Syed, and she became a very close part of our family. She started FaceTiming us the next day. They did allow us to take some pictures up to the room so they could actually see him and see us, the nurses and people that were helping.
Yep.
Every time a nurse would come on, I would ask, please tell me your name. And our family wrote their names all on our wall, on a piece of paper on our wall, just because I wanted them to know specifically, we are praying for you by name. And I want you to know from our family how much we appreciate you putting your life on the line and your family's life on the line just to care for our loved one.
Yep.
And it means so much to us. And I didn't want to forget that.
And that's a big part of this story.
And it's a huge part of the story.
For the community in general, society in general, there have been some, profiles in courage around the medical personnel, but for your family, these are, their names.
They're friends.
They are personal heroes.
They are, and they are a lifeline to the person that we love and are fighting for. So yes, that happened from the next week. There was the community gathered around and tried to do different things. They had a prayer walk. The Florida soccer team created a Zoom call that was prayer for hundreds of people got on. It was overwhelming, the kindness that people were trying because they didn't know what else to do.
And meanwhile, Stuart,
he's just
I just
chilling.
laid
no
there.
idea.
I just laid there.
Yeah.
I had hallucinations that we should not talk about.
Yes.
Why not? So tell us another big part of this for those of us who were, on the outside praying, getting information every once in a while. Tell us the story about the blue heart in the window.
The blue heart came after. The next weekend was Easter weekend, and we didn't know what else to do. You and Sandra had suggested we get our tested in the parking lot of the church, and so we said we were going to do that, and we did that Monday after Easter. But we thought, okay, our symptoms are mild enough, we could at least ride together to the parking lot. We didn't know. We knew he was in room 7. Yeah, we knew he was in room 7 on the 4th floor. I knew what side of the hospital I came out of, but that's all I knew. At this point, we were updating people via social media, so I think some of the people from the hospital started following us and realizing that we were sitting in the parking lot.
Looking up at the side of a hospital,
at the
wondering,
side of the hospital.
Which window, right?
Yes. And one of his first nurses, her name was Melody, she came back to work after being off, and she brought this poster paper, and it was a blue polka dotted heart, and she put up in his window that faced 400 out in the parking lot, and she told us, I have put this heart in the window so you can know what room he's in. And a small gesture on her part, she's thinking. But for us, it was
huge.
life.
Yeah.
It was so life-giving for me and my children, as well as for the community, friends, family. And then it ended up becoming over social media. Like, this heart represented Stuart. It became like what everybody was praying for, this one heart. We,
among many, many people, and for those of you who are not familiar with the Atlanta area or the part of town that we're talking about, there's a major highway, and the hospital is on the highway, and literally on the highway you could glance over at the hospital and there's that blue heart. And like so many, we drove up, sat in the parking lot, prayed for you, looking up at the blue heart.
I know, because once I did come out of the fog, this nurse came in my room one day and goes, I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure I just saw Andy Stanley in the parking lot.
I didn't know that part. Yeah.
Well,
praying for you.
Praying for you.
So I'm like, okay. But so that became a lifeline for us. And that ended up the next weekend. the community ended up every 30 minutes, somebody sitting in the parking lot praying, and then also online or wherever they're from, they could pray wherever they were for 30 minutes, sign up for a 30-minute prayer time. It was, just absolutely amazing and overwhelming how much the community came out and loved and supported online community as well as personal community.
But there was also reason to pray as well, because I would do really, really well and then tank.
And
we would get so hopeful.
Yes.
And we're like, he's coming out of this. And then
they kept saying, which to begin with, there was no hope. Then that first weekend, I think a friend of yours is Dr. Callahan, and he had his associate come in and see him over the weekend. His name is Dr. Jagadesh, and that was the first person that ever gave me hope. He told me on a Saturday, right before Easter, I think he's going to survive. He goes, we're kind of seeing that how he is running this course, that his survival rate is high. I just broke down, started crying on the phone because and he's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes," but you're the first person that's told me this.
Well, so to drop another important date, if I get this right, so you go in on April 7th. On April 20th, I don't know who told me this story first. There's this moment where there's 6 doctors standing around Stuart, all basically scratching their heads like, we've done everything we know to do. It's been up and down, up and down. Right now, it's just down, and we have run out of options. So tell us a little bit about that. That was a big day.
That was huge. The week before, he had been extubated and re-intubated within 3 hours. It was so
for
drastic.
the non-medical folks, taken off the ventilator,
put back on the ventilator.
Apparently, he got really, really agitated and wanted to get out of the bed.
And his oxygen dropped again. And they kept saying, leading up to the 20th, they kept saying, 24 more hours, 24 more. Let's give him steroids, 24 for his lungs, 24 more hours. And it kept just progressing to the point where he was on spontaneous meaning that he was breathing on his own on the ventilator for over 24 hours, but they wanted to wait until like Monday. Well, Sunday night, he threw up in his ventilator, and it just created this downward spiral of all complications. From that point, he started bleeding internally. He had ulcers from the ventilator.
My body was septic.
His body was septic. He had a horrific bacterial infection that more doctors and nurses didn't really want to go into his room because of the bacterial infection than the COVID. He had blood clots in his legs, and obviously the blood clot is what created the heart attack. So they had to be very careful about how they treated the GI bleed because of the blood clots, because if you treated one, then you didn't know if the other one was going to dislodge. So, it was at that point, there was like 6 doctors standing over him going, he's dying. What do we do?
Right, because this was that spiral that happens not infrequently, where it just the body
starts
just
breaking
takes
down.
over, and it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. What if we treat one, it's going to make the other worse. So they're standing around the bed, and then a doctor has an idea that made all the difference.
Dr. Harish.
He called me, and he said he basically said, your husband's dying. He's very sick. And I said, yes, I know. And he said, I want to try something. I want to try a plasma exchange. He said it's very low risk. We use it for sickle cell patients. But I think it might work. And if it doesn't, there was no harm.
Right.
And I said, please try it. Whatever you want to do, try it. Do something. And so on Tuesday afternoon, he started the first plasma exchange. Within 24 hours, he was a different person. His eyes had lit up. He was moving his hands. Totally different person. They did another plasma exchange on Wednesday. They thought they were going to do one on Thursday. They said he didn't need one. His numbers had stabilized. They had taken him off like all blood pressure medicine. It was crazy, the difference. On Friday, they extubated him. I didn't tell anybody they extubated him besides my immediate family, just because of what happened in the past.
Yep.
And I didn't want to get hopes up and then have to come back and do another nosedive again. So I kept it quiet until late that afternoon. And from that point on, things just started going so fast. He was sitting in a chair on Saturday. The physical therapists had him sitting up in a chair for like an hour on Saturday after he was extubated on Friday. Sunday, I took his phone to him. He's FaceTiming us himself.
So is that when you went to the ICU and got to see him for the first time?
That was a little bit later, because then.
So this is all within a week. Because I remember getting the text, and it was like, wait a minute, we're planning, we're mentally planning a funeral. It was
bad.
Right.
It was bad. I remember walking down our street, and I wasn't really making eye contact with people, and one of the neighbors says, "How are things today?" And I just started crying. I said, "It's not good. It's not good." And at that point, the turnaround was so drastic. His palliative care doctor thought, he's about to turn a corner. He can go one or two ways. And she got permission for me to come spend 45 minutes with them.
So this is your first time to see him
since
in 3?
April, at least 20-something days.
Wow.
I thought it was just a really attractive nurse out in the hallway. and then I'm like, there was a nurse in my room, and I'm like, I think that's my wife.
So you're
At
becoming
this point,
aware.
I'm coming out of the fog, and and I still am. It's hard for me to talk about. I was so emotional because I couldn't put the pieces together of where am I, and I had a heart attack, and
you couldn't understand why we weren't there.
Right. So her coming in the room and just being able to touch her and kiss her, and then for her to kind of explain, this is what's going on. It's the brilliance and wisdom of Dr. Saya, because she just called it. She's like, this is what he needs. He needs his wife.
And with that, in regard to that, I had to, there was a couple of situations that happened, but on my way, of course, I thought I threw all risk out the window when she called and said, "I've got a surprise for you." So I'm like, yes, I'm in the car. I'm on the way to the hospital. Well, my son calls Dr. Syed as I'm driving to the hospital and wants her to explain to him why it is okay for me to come now when I couldn't come all this time.
Right.
And then could she promise him that he was going to take care of me? What were you going to do to take care? Because I didn't even think about it, but like, your dad's almost dying, and now your mom's going to be put at risk. That didn't even cross my mind. I'm just thinking, I get to see Stuart. I'm going. Which when I got to the hospital, Dr. Syed was like, "Your son just called."
He's looking out after mom.
Yes, he was.
And then 2 days.
I had to garb up, which
to go in,
totally.
Well, no wonder you didn't recognize her, right?
Well, and it does. I think it changed her perspective.
It changes your perspective towards the nurses and the doctors to understand the layer of clothing that you have to put on to even walk into the room, and that you have to take all those layers off to leave the room before you can go into another room
and start the process over again.
Yes, it was unbelievable.
Wow.
The experience of that.
And then, if I have this correct, 2 days later, they bring Stuart out into
ICU.
the parking lot. Is this?
He leaves ICU.
I leave ICU, and they do. I think we do have video of this.
Oh yeah. Let's just stop and let everybody watch this. So this is the moment. Then they're bringing you out of ICU to take you to
a
regular room.
We're on FaceTime, so we're watching the whole thing.
Right.
They're playing the Rocky theme.
They're playing the Rocky theme.
So let's just roll that. I think everybody will appreciate this. Watch this.
First of all, thank you all for what you do for my family, but also thank you for completely humiliating me right now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, you had a team rallying around you out there.
Yeah, we all saw that, and I mean, we all cried. I just don't, I remember Sandra and I saw it, I cried. I said, Sandra, have you seen this? We cried. It felt miraculous as we, day by day.
Andy, one of the things you'll notice if you watch that video closely is when they bring me out of the room, I'm clapping. And I was clapping because this was really a celebration of all those men and women who fought for my life. It wasn't for me. And I had such a hard time talking because I just was looking in the faces of people, as Kellee said earlier, that had risked their life to save my life. When you think about Jesus saying, there's no greater love than this, than someone would lay down their life for a friend. I think from now on, every time we think about doctors and nurses, that's what we're going to think about. And that's what I was thinking about rolling out of there.
Wow.
Was these men and women are clapping for me. Survivors get way too much credit. It's the men and women, and I mean, friends like you and all over this country that prayed and loved me home. That's what that parade was about. And I'm just so humbled and grateful for that sacrifice. We can't be the same after that.
And for the nurses and doctors that day that stood in the hallway, I think it's hope. And what keeps them going is the one piece of hope that one person is leaving room 7 and is going to a regular room. Wow.
So from that point on, you're conscious of the journey from that point forward.
Relatively conscious. Yeah.
You couldn't see, right?
I was having a difficult time seeing, and all joking aside, I thought when I was in the medically induced coma, I thought I was a part of a drug cartel war. I got stuck in a Tyler Perry sitcom I couldn't get out of. The worst was I was underneath a plexiglass floor underwater, and people were walking and talking above me. I had on an oxygen mask, but I couldn't find a way out.
Oh, gosh.
So as you're coming out of the fog, reality didn't make sense. But once I got into a regular room, I was able to, the more that medicine got out of your body, the physical therapist, all of that.
The reason they allowed us to see him outside was because they did think they were going to have to take him to acute therapy, where he would have to stay for another week or 2. And he was fighting them so hard. And I'm like, he will do the right thing if he can just let him see us. Yep. If he can see us and touch us, then he will do the right thing if that's what you feel like he needs to do.
I just wanted to be able to tell my kids that I'm going to be okay.
So that was on.
They got permission to bring him out. The 30th,
April 30th. So they bring you outside in the parking lot.
Yes.
You still can't go in. And this is the first time your kids have seen you, and I guess the second time Kellee seen you since she said goodbye to you.
Yeah. And I had, I sat them down after the crying and the hugs and kisses. I just sat them down and said, I'm going to be okay, but this is what I think I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to go to acute physical therapy. And this is crazy. The 2 physical therapists that wheeled me down took me back up to my room. And one of them said, Stuart, have you walked without your walker? And I said, yeah, I have. She's like, well, show me, right when I got to the room. And I walked across the room. And she said, you don't need acute physical therapy.
Oh, wow.
And so from that point
on, he came home.
Yeah.
When did he come home?
May 2nd, 2 days later.
2 days later.
Yeah.
All of our friends and family had lined
the parade. Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal.
And they were, what's so sweet is our friends feel just as much celebrated as he did, because I think this was a fight we we dug in and we're fighting on his behalf.
Yep.
And it was just a humongous celebration of he did it. He made it. He's alive. He's here. And to actually see a miracle walking, and we felt, I don't even know what the number is today, but 32,000 people have died. And why God chose to save him, we couldn't understand that. And we couldn't understand just the despair that these people and these families, because of what we